Hey you guys, today we're going to be talking about converting fractions, decimals, and percents. So we're going to go through all of this. I'm going to give you a chart to help you out because I know trying to remember all the rules can just be a whole lot more work than you really want to deal with. So I'm going to write my chart over here. It's in your notes if you want to fill it out in your notes instead. So we're going to convert from decimals into percents and into fractions. Alright, and we can convert directly between any of these three different forms of a number, although sometimes it may be easier to go the other direction and do two steps rather than to try and do the one. So the easiest conversions to do are decimals into percents, or the other way, percent into decimal. So to go from a decimal to a percent, you're going to multiply by 100. So all that's really going to mean for you is that if you've got a decimal, you move the decimal 2 places to the right. So that's the same thing as multiplying by 100, and that goes from a decimal to percent. So then to go the other direction, if you have a percent and you want the decimal form, then you're going to divide by 100. So if you have a percent, to get back to a decimal, you're just going to move your decimal place 2 places to the left, and that's going to give you the decimal. So that's the easiest conversion to do, but we can do all of the others. So to go from a percent into a fraction, that's one of the ones that's not so fun to try and do. But to get from a percent into a fraction, you're going to put your percent over 100. So we're going to do percent over 100, then simplify. And that's going to give us the fraction form of that percent. We can also go the other direction. So to get from a fraction to a percent, and this is one of the ones that's challenging because it doesn't always work out perfectly, but if you have a fraction, to get it to a percent, then if you can get a denominator of 100, let me write that. Get a denominator of 100, then the numerator is going to be the number for your percent. So that one's not as easy to do. It doesn't work out with every single fraction. All right, and then to go from a fraction to a decimal, this one's pretty easy if you can do your division. To go from a fraction to a decimal, we just divide, and that's it. We do numerator divided by denominator, and that takes us from a fraction to a decimal. And then to go the opposite direction, to go from a decimal into a fraction, we're going to make a fraction based on place value. So we're going to make a fraction using place value. And we're going to look at some examples, but basically what that means is if we have a decimal and the last number in the decimal is in the tenths place, then we put the decimal over 10. If we have a decimal where the last number is in the thousandths place, then we put the decimal over 1,000 and then we simplify. So let's look at a few examples of what that would look like. So first we're starting off with some decimals, and from these decimals we want to get a fraction and a percent. So to start off with, we have 0.32. Alright, so we need to get this decimal into a percent and into a fraction. So the easiest one to get to is going to be to the percent, because to get to a percent from a decimal, if we follow our line here, sorry I kind of took it off the screen, but to get from a decimal to a percent, we multiply by 100, which means we move our decimal 2 places over to the right. So when we move it 2 places to the right, we get 32, and then we just add in our percent sign. Alright, so 32% is the percentage form of 0.32. Next, we need to get the fraction. So 2 ways we can do this now. We can start at the decimal and go to the fraction, or now that we have the percent, we can go from percent into fraction. And it really depends on which you prefer. Both of them are actually going to give you the same fraction to start off with, and then we have to simplify. So if we do it the most direct way, the shortest way on our chart, starting with a decimal, going to a fraction, we need to make a fraction using place value. So if we have 0.32, the first number is in the tenths place, the second number is in the hundredths place, and it would keep increasing as you went along. So if the 2 is in the hundredths place, then to make this a fraction, we put the decimal without the decimal point, so just 32 over 100 because it ended in the hundredths place. Then this isn't our final answer. We have to get our fraction in simplest form. So to do that, we're going to reduce it the way we talked about last week. So we're going to divide by any common factors. So I don't know all the common factors of 32 and 100. If I'm thinking about my facts, I know 100 is divisible by 4, and I know 32 is divisible by 4. If you didn't get that one right away, they're also both even numbers, so you could divide by 2. But if I divide by 4, 32 divided by 4 is 8, and 100 divided by 4 is 25, and then 8 and 25 don't have any common factors. So that would be our fraction form. So our decimal was converted into 32% and into 8 over 25. All right, so that was our first decimal conversion. Let's do it again with 0.125. So again, easiest one to do is to first go to the percent, because to get from a decimal into a percent, we multiply by 100, which means we move the decimal 2 places to the right. So if we move it 2 places to the right, the decimal is after the 2, so we get 12.5%. So that's our percentage form. Nice and easy, right? To get from a decimal to a fraction, we can make it into a fraction using the place value. So in this case, we have a 1 in the tenths place, a 2 in the hundredth place, and then the last number, the 5, is in the thousandth place. So for us to simplify this, we're going to do 125 over 1,000, because the 5, the last number, was in the thousandth place. And then we have to simplify. So looking at these, I can see they're both divisible by 5, because one ends in a 5 and the other ends in a 0. I also think they're probably both going to be divisible by 25. I know 1,000 is divisible by 25, 100 is divisible by 25, 200, all the hundreds are divisible. So 1,000 would also be divisible by 25. 125 is 25 more than 100. I know 100 can be divided by 25, so I'm going to divide by 25. 125 divided by 25 is 5. And then 1,000 divided by 25 is 40. Because if you think about 100 divided by 25 is 4, you had an extra 0, so you get an extra 0 in your answer. So I have 5 over 40. That can still be simplified. So I did not pick the greatest common factor here, which is okay. So I still need to simplify, because 5 and 40 can both be divided by 5. So I'm going to divide by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 40 divided by 5 is 8. So I get my final answer for my fraction is 1 over 8. So that was starting with a decimal and getting to the other two forms. Next, we're going to look at starting with a percent. So first we have 46%, and we want to get from 46% into a fraction and a decimal. So if we come down here with our 46%, all right, if we need to get a fraction, I'm just doing that because it's first on the list. The rule says we start with our percent, we put it over 100, and then we simplify it to get to a fraction. So doing that with 46%, we do 46 over 100, we put our percentage over 100, and then we have to simplify. And honestly, I have no idea what the greatest common factor of 46 and 100 is. So I'm going to start with 2 because they're both even numbers, and I know even numbers are always divisible by 2. 46 divided by 2 is, let me think, 2 goes into 4 times 2. 2 goes into 6 times 3, so 23. And then 100 divided by 2 is 50. And then 23 and 50 don't have any factors in common, so it turns out 2 was the greatest common factor. So sometimes it works out nicely like that, and I don't have to do extra math. So we have the fraction. We also need the decimal. The decimal is a lot easier to get from the percent. To get from a percent into a decimal, we divide by 100. So what that means is we take our decimal, which is after the 46, and move it left 2 places. So when we move it left 2 places, it's in front of the 4, and we get 0.46 or just 0.46 if that's what you prefer. All right, so 0.46. Next, we have 15.5%. So if we have 15.5%, I didn't write that the best, sorry. 15.5%. To get the fraction, again, we put our percentage over 100, just like it says here, and then we're going to simplify. So 15.5 over 100. Well, here's the deal. We can't have a decimal on top of our fraction and then simplify it. So to take care of the decimal, we have to move the decimal to the right. So when we do that, we get 155 on top. But if we move the decimal up here on the top to the right, we also have to move the decimal down here. So instead of 100, if we move it over one place, we would get 1,000. And then we got to go through and divide. So again, I don't know what the greatest common factor is here. I'm going to tell you that they're both divisible by 5 because they end in a 5 and a 0. 155 divided by 5. Let's see. 5 goes into 15 times 3, and then 5 goes into 5 times 1. So 31 over 1,000 divided by 5. I know 5 goes into 10 times 2, and then I have 2 extra zeros at the end. So 31 over 200. All right, 31 is a prime number, so the only possible common factor between these would be 31 and 200. I'm going to tell you right now, 31 does not go into 200. So that would be our fraction form. And then to get our decimal, we just move the decimal 2 places to the left, or what we're really doing is dividing by 100. So if we move our decimal 2 places to the left, we get 0.155, or you can put the 0 out in front, 0.155. Alright, so that's changing a percent into a fraction and into a decimal. And then the very last section the very last conversion we're going to look at is going to be converting a fraction into a decimal and into a percent. Alright, so I'm going to have to get a new sheet of paper for this, which I've got laying around here somewhere. Just a second, you guys. I'm not prepared. Here we go. Paper. Alright, we still got our chart there, but I'm going to work the problems down here. Alright, so we're starting off with the fraction 4 over 5. And we need to convert 4 over 5 into a decimal and into a percent. Well, if we look at our chart, to go from a fraction into a decimal, we are going to divide. So we're going to do 4 divided by 5. So when we do 4 divided by 5, we put 4 in the division box and 5 on the outside. Well, 5 doesn't go into 4, so we have to add a decimal after 4 and then add a 0 after that because we need more numbers to try and divide into. 5 goes into 40 times 8, and then we subtract 8 times 5 is 40. 40 minus 40 is 0, so we're done. We just have to remember to bring up our decimal. So 0.8 or 0.8 is the decimal form of 4/5. And then to get from a fraction into a percent, 2 ways we can do it. One might be easier than the other. So to get from a fraction to a percent, we can either get a denominator of 100 and then the numerator is our percent, or we can go from fraction to decimal and then decimal to percent, because the decimal to percent conversion is easy. So the way I prefer to do it, I'll be honest with you, is to go from decimal to percent once I have the decimal, because that's a really easy conversion to do. It's just moving a decimal place over. But I'm going to show you the other direction because you've already looked at how to convert decimals into percents. So to get from a fraction to a percent, we get a denominator of 100. So to do that, I need to go from 4 over 5 to something over 100. So to get from 5 to 100, I multiply by 20, not by 25, I multiply by 20. Ignore me there, guys. 5 times 20 is 100. So since I multiply the bottom by 20, if I multiply the top by 20, I'll get an equivalent fraction. So 4 times 20 is 80. So we get 80 over 100. So our percent is going to be the numerator here. So our percentage is 80%. Now, if you come up here, easier way to do that would be once we had our 0.8 as the decimal, move the decimal over 2 places to the right and get 80, and that's your percent. But you can always go through this process as long as it works. We're going to look at one next that doesn't work out so well. So we've got 6 over 9. So first we're going to try and find the decimal. So we need to do division, 6 divided by 9. 9 doesn't go into 6, so we need to add a decimal and a 0 after it. Then we need to know how many times 9 goes into 60. Well, 9 times 6 is 54. 9 times 7 is 63. So 7 is too big, so it's going to be times 6. So we subtract 54, and we get 6 as our remainder. So we add a 0, bring it down. How many times does 9 go into 60? Well, that would give us 6. So we've got stuck in a pattern, because if we keep subtracting minus 54, we would get 6, we would add a 0, bring it down. We're stuck in a loop. So when that happens, we know that our decimal is repeating. So our decimal is going to be 0.6 repeating or 0.66 repeating, however many you want to write. But it's going to be 0.6 repeating. So that's going to be our decimal form. So then to get to our percent form, let's try it the way we did it over here. 6 over 9 to something over 100. Well, we need to know what we multiplied 9 by to get 100. Well, let's see. I know 9 times 11 is 99. That's close, but that's not 100. 9 times 12 is 108. Well, that's too big. So the problem is we don't have a nice perfect whole number here. So that doesn't really work great for us. So sometimes you run into problems like this where there's not a perfect whole number for you to do trying to get a denominator of 100. So when that's the case, this bottom row here of our conversion chart doesn't really work. So instead, we're going to go up to our decimal, which we know, and change our decimal into a fraction using that conversion chart. So we couldn't take the short route. We had to go around the block. If you're driving, you couldn't go in a straight line. You have to make it around the block. So we went to a decimal, and from the decimal, we're going to go to a percent by multiplying by 100. So what that means with our 0.6 repeating, we move the decimal 2 places to the right. When we do that, we have 6, and then after that 6 is still repeating. So when we move it 2 places to the right after that, we have another number over here. So 0.6 repeating. So we keep that repeating now once we move that decimal over. So 66.6 repeating is the percentage version of 6 over 9. Alright, you guys, so that was converting fractions, decimals, and percents, looking at all those different equivalent forms. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and have a great day.